The work that Amal Clooney has done for 15 years received just that kind of boost when she married one of Hollywood's biggest stars, George Clooney.
Called me up and he said, "There's a girl coming to your house that you're going to marry." And I was like, "You're an idiot."
George Clooney was the man everyone in Hollywood swore would never settle down. For years, he was the suave bachelor with the perfect smile, the kind of man who seemed like he was made to stay single forever. He even joked about it himself and straight up said marriage just wasn't for him. But here's where it gets interesting.
I met him and I thought, I'm so glad that there's someone like him in the world. I didn't necessarily imagine that I would get to spend my life with him or that we would have this incredible family.
Yeah.
Despite saying he didn't want a family, something shifted, and it changed everything. So here's how George Clooney's final interview confirms what we all suspected. George and Amal's seemingly unbreakable bond.
The purpose of your life is now not you. It's
very odd.
Yeah.
And I have to say, before I had the twins, I felt that about her.
Before all that, George's dating history was like a Hollywood highlight reel. From Italian actress Elisabetta Canales to model Lisa Snowden, and even former wrestler-turned-actress Stacy Keibler, Clooney was never short on high-profile romances. His relationship with Stacy Keibler, in particular, had fans thinking maybe he was finally ready to settle. This is because they were together for nearly 2 years, looked stunning on every red carpet, and seemed genuinely happy. But eventually, it fizzled out, allegedly because their life plans didn't align. So the question started lingering in the air. Was Clooney just destined to fly solo forever? Well, in 2013, another character entered the scene. It was Amal Alamuddin, a human rights lawyer, but she didn't walk into his life through a flashy Hollywood party. Their story began in the most unexpected way. A mutual friend invited her to stay at Clooney's house in Lake Como, Italy. Clooney said the moment Amal walked through the door, he felt something different. He wasn't used to being thrown off like that, but Amal wasn't just anyone. And it didn't take long for him to realize that. Within a few months, Clooney was already planning a proposal. By April of 2014, he popped the question, and just a few months later, in September, they got married in Venice, with the entire world watching. Everyone was in awe, because the ultimate Hollywood bachelor had found his person. But here's the twist you were waiting for. Despite the fairy tale setup, whispers started circulating. Rumors of tension, distance, and something unraveling behind closed doors were all over the place. Amal and George seemed picture-perfect on the outside, but sources began hinting that not everything was as flawless as it appeared. So, what happened? That's the part people are scrambling to understand. Some insiders say it wasn't one dramatic incident, but rather a slow buildup of disconnection. Others point fingers at their demanding schedules. Clooney juggling films and humanitarian projects. Amal deeply committed to her legal work. It left very little room for stillness. And then there's the matter of their twins. They welcomed twins in 2017, a milestone that many believed would solidify their bond even more. And for a while, it looked like it did. But as time went on, juggling parenthood alongside global careers reportedly added more pressure. Some claim they began living almost separate lives, orbiting around each other, but rarely intersecting. They had to spend long periods apart and miss important milestones, and a sense of emotional distance crept in. And then came the rumors of a possible separation, so here we are. Is Amal really preparing to file for divorce from George Clooney? Nothing has been officially confirmed, but the signs are hard to ignore. And if it's true, It would mark the end of what many believed was one of Hollywood's most surprising yet powerful love stories. But before we figure out the answers, let's look back at George's life. How George Clooney grew.
We're very proud of the fact that we're able to participate in what all these brave people are doing. Have you met my wife?
I said Thierry Bell.
Hi. Sorry?
Beautiful tonight.
Oh,
You
thank
chose
you so
that
much.
one.
So you chose mine?
I told her I chose your dress for you.
It's always the way.
Yeah.
George Clooney's life began on May 6, 1961, in Lexington, Kentucky. Born into a family already familiar with the spotlight, George was surrounded by storytellers and performers. His mother, Nina Bruce, had been a beauty queen and city councilwoman, while his father, Nick Clooney, worked as a television host and anchorman, including a 5-year stint on American movie classics. But the story gets even more intriguing when you dig deeper into George's roots. He shares ancestry with President Abraham Lincoln. His maternal fourth great-grandmother was the half-sister of Lincoln's mother, making George and Honest Abe distant cousins. He was raised Roman Catholic and moved frequently as a child, attending a mix of Catholic and public schools across Kentucky and Ohio. Around 7th grade, a major setback hit. George developed Bell's palsy, temporarily paralyzing half his face. Though the condition faded within a year, it left a lasting impact. George would later reflect that the experience taught him how to laugh at himself, something he'd rely on heavily in Hollywood. By high school, George was back on his feet. He earned top grades and played both basketball and baseball, even trying out for the Cincinnati Reds in 1977. Though he didn't make the cut, the audition gave him a taste of what it meant to chase a dream. He briefly studied broadcast journalism in college but left before finishing. In between gigs, he sold shoes, insurance, and even cut tobacco. George's first step into acting came in 1978 as an extra in the miniseries Centennial. He then picked up small television roles throughout the 80s, from The Facts of Life to The Golden Girls and Roseanne. By the early 90s, he was booking steady work, but it was one particular role that changed everything. In 1994, George was cast as Dr. Doug Ross on the National Broadcasting Company's ER. The medical drama became a television sensation, and George's performance earned him Emmy and Golden Globe nominations. For 5 seasons, he played the charming pediatrician, balancing on-screen intensity with real-world magnetism. But George was never one to stay comfortable. He was already looking at the big screen. He made his first major film appearance in From Dusk Till Dawn, followed by One Fine Day and The Peacemaker. 2000 marked a major turning point. That year, he starred in The Perfect Storm and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, the latter earning him a Golden Globe nomination and comparisons to Clark Gable. But he wasn't content to just act. George directed Confessions of a Dangerous Mind in 2002, showing he had a vision behind the camera too. Then came Syriana in 2005, which earned him his first Oscar, and Good Night and Good Luck, which earned him nominations for Best Director and Best Original Screenplay. He had become the rare actor equally respected for directing and producing. In 2013, George reached another career milestone. He produced Argo, which won Best Picture at the Oscars, solidifying his reputation as a powerhouse behind the scenes. Around the same time, he co-founded Casamigos Tequila with Rande Gerber. That little side venture sold for $700 million in 2017, with the potential for $300 million more based on future performance. The next chapter was a return to directing, with mixed results. The Monuments Men, Suburbicon, and The Midnight Sky had varying degrees of success, but none dulled his reputation. He also launched Smokehouse Pictures, which began producing documentaries and political projects, including one for home box office on the Ohio State University abuse scandal. In 2022, George reunited with Julia Roberts for Ticket to Paradise, and in 2023, he reprised his role as Batman in a surprise cameo for The Flash. He then directed The Boys in the Boat, a sports drama that premiered on Christmas Day. In 2024, he re-teamed with Brad Pitt for Wolves, a thriller by John Watts, and was cast in Noah Baumbach's upcoming Netflix film, J. Kelly. Then came a long-awaited first. In 2025, George Clooney made his Broadway debut in Good Night and Good Luck, portraying Edward R. Murrow, the same role he helped immortalize on screen years earlier. Critics praised his stage presence, calling it sincere, witty, and grounded. But what about his personal life? This might come as a surprise, but George Clooney's famous love story with Amal wasn't his first walk down the aisle. Past experiences.
But were you taken with him too?
I definitely
Or did you think
was.
he's a Hollywood movie star? I don't know.
I met him and I thought, I'm so glad that there's someone like him in the world. I didn't necessarily imagine that I would get to spend my life with him or that we would have this incredible family.
Yeah.
So it
Now we got
took me by surprise.
Screwed my life up, man. Life was easy for me.
Long before the world knew him as the silver-haired heartthrob and Hollywood's most charming leading man, George was just a young actor trying to find his place, both on screen and in love. And before there was Amal, there was Talia Balsam. It all started in the year 1984, back when George's face wasn't plastered across billboards or magazine covers. He was still climbing the ladder of success, still dreaming. But in the middle of that struggle, he found something unexpected, a deep connection with Talia during a community theater production. Their chemistry was immediate, the kind that makes you think fate had a plan. George fell hard, and from the way people described it, it wasn't just a crush, it was something that felt destined. And Talia wasn't just another actress, she came from Hollywood royalty, the daughter of Martin Balsam and Joyce Van Patten. That mix of legacy and charm pulled George in fast. She had that classic aura, the kind of presence that doesn't need a spotlight to shine. For George, being with her during those early, uncertain days must have felt like magic, like everything was falling into place. But as with many young love stories, the magic didn't last forever. That's where things start to shift. Just as George was stepping into the spotlight, building his career brick by brick, the relationship crumbled. And it wasn't George who walked away, it was Talia. Just when everything else seemed to be taking off, the one thing he thought was secure slipped away. And even though he moved on, even though he dated actress Kelly Preston for a few years, there was always that lingering thought. What if that chapter with Talia wasn't actually closed? That question kept echoing until fate gave him another shot. Years later, George and Talia crossed paths again. The timing was completely unexpected, but whatever the reason, they decided to give it another go. George proposed in 1989, and just like that, they jetted off to Las Vegas and got married. In George's own words, he was young, enamored, and fully swept up in the moment. It felt limitless, like nothing could go wrong. But real life doesn't care about romantic timing. Only a few months in, cracks began to show. After just 3 years, the marriage was already unraveling. George would later open up about how hard it was and how the stress crept in, even affecting his health. He developed an ulcer so severe it started leaking. He was still chasing stardom, juggling the intense pressure of Hollywood with the weight of a marriage that was slipping through his fingers. The man who always seemed so cool and collected was quietly drowning in expectations. And here's where the truth gets harder. George admitted the breakup was his fault, not because of scandal or betrayal, but because, deep down, he wasn't ready. He wasn't built for marriage, at least not then. That kind of honesty is rare, and it stayed with him. The experience left a mark, one that shaped how he saw commitment for years to come. He wasn't just avoiding marriage. He was haunted by one he believed he ruined. But life has a way of rewriting even the most fixed beliefs. Years after that heartbreak, when it seemed like George had fully settled into the bachelor lifestyle, someone came along and rewired everything he thought he knew. George's introduction to Amal.
A mutual friend of ours said, I'm stopping by and can I bring my friend? And I was like, of course. And I got a call from my agent who called me and said, I met this woman who's coming to your house who you're going to marry.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So now this was arranged by an agent? Your talent agent had done all the paperwork ahead of time.
It really worked out that way.
Yeah.
Amal was never your typical Hollywood insider. She didn't chase the spotlight, and she definitely wasn't just another admirer of the red carpet scene. Long before the world linked her name with George Clooney, Amal Alamuddin had already built a reputation most people could only dream of. We're talking about a woman who regularly stood before the European Court of Human Rights and the International Criminal Court, advocating for people whose freedom was hanging in the balance. But here's what makes it even more compelling. Amal wasn't just present in these spaces, she was leading in them. She's been consistently praised as a brilliant legal mind by highly respected organizations like Legal 500 and Chambers and Partners. And it gets even better. You can take a closer look at the cases she's worked on, and you'll start to understand why her reputation is so formidable. She defended former Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko, stood by Egyptian-Canadian journalist Mohammed Fahmy during his high-profile detention, and even represented Julian Assange in his battle against extradition. And that's just scratching the surface. So what is it that sets her apart? It's not just her sharp intellect or her legal strategies. It's the way she carries herself with a quiet power that demands respect. Her passion for justice radiates through everything she does. Her striking beauty might grab headlines, but make no mistake, Amal's mind is what leaves the strongest impression, and she's just as captivating in a courtroom as she is walking into a gala. Her colleagues say she's always one step ahead, strategically sharp, always composed, and somehow effortlessly stylish, even while handling international disputes that most people would be too afraid to touch. But where did it all start? Her story begins far from Hollywood. As a young girl, she and her family fled Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War, eventually settling in Buckinghamshire, England. That early life shift could have derailed anyone, but not Amal. She went on to attend Oxford on a full scholarship and graduated with honors from St. Hugh's College. Still not satisfied, she crossed the Atlantic to New York University, where she earned her law degree and picked up an award in entertainment law along the way. But here's where things got even more interesting. Amal and George didn't just bond over charm or good looks. What drew them together was something deeper: shared values, a passion for justice, and a belief that their influence could be used for something more meaningful than press appearances. In 2016, they launched the Clooney Foundation for Justice, an initiative that reaches into schools, courtrooms, and communities to protect and promote human rights across the globe. And Amal's dedication goes far beyond any single headline. She served as senior counselor to former United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan when he was acting as the United Nations envoy on Syria. Her work continues to have a global impact, tackling some of the most pressing human rights issues of our time. George, meanwhile, had his own track record of activism, especially in conflict zones like Darfur. Their careers, intense and demanding as they are, brought them closer instead of pulling them apart. But for all their powerful moments on the world stage, their personal love story had its own kind of charm. Enter the proposal.
And I also, I guess in closing, I would just like to say to my bride-to-be, Amal, that I love you very much.
Oh my God.
And I can't wait to be your husband. Thank you very much.
It's wonderful.
You'd think George Clooney, one of the world's most beloved actors, would propose in some grand Hollywood-style setting, right? But here's where things take a turn. What was supposed to be a picture-perfect memory became more of a comedy of errors. George had the whole evening planned down to the smallest detail. He cooked dinner at home and set the mood with a curated playlist of classic tunes by his legendary aunt, Rosemary Clooney. He picked one special song, Why Shouldn't I?, to play at the exact moment he would propose. But right before the big moment, plans changed. Amal, just back from a trip to London, casually suggested they order takeaway instead. The timing couldn't have been more off. Clooney had everything prepared, and suddenly, the mood was flipped. Determined to stick to his plan, he insisted they enjoy the dinner he had painstakingly prepared, convinced that if they could just savor that moment together, everything else would fall into place. But what George didn't know was that his picture-perfect proposal was about to take another unexpected turn. The engagement ring was hidden in a drawer behind them, and the plan was simple. Once a certain song started playing, George would casually suggest Amal grab a lighter from that drawer, giving her a surprise she would never forget. But fate had other plans. When the cue song came on, George nudged her. "Can you check the drawer for a lighter?" Amal did as asked, opened it, and spotted the ring. But things got messed up. Why? Because she immediately assumed it was something left behind by a past house guest. Without a second glance, she shut the drawer and went right back to the conversation. George was stunned. This was the moment. But the moment was gone. With the air quickly leaking out of the perfect evening he had imagined, George decided to just go for it. He got down on one knee and launched into the speech he had rehearsed 100 times in his head, talking about his love, his hopes, his desire to spend forever with her. But Amal's reaction was not what he expected. She didn't leap into his arms or say yes right away. She gasped repeatedly, and a string of "oh my gods" was all she could manage, frozen by the surprise. But George was still down on one knee, unsure whether he should stay there or just crawl under the table. Time dragged on, and what was supposed to be a smooth, romantic gesture now felt like a painfully slow scene from a sitcom. To make matters worse, the playlist he had carefully curated wasn't exactly helping. Instead of a romantic ballad underscoring this life-changing moment, the next track queued up was "Goody Goody," a slightly comical tune that only made the silence feel more awkward. He later realized he had been on one knee for a full 25 minutes. At one point, he even blurted out, "Look, I really hope the answer is yes, but I really need an answer. I'm 52, and I could throw out my hip at any second." That line finally cracked Amal's shock, and she laughed and gave the answer he had been waiting for. Yes. One of Hollywood's most eligible bachelors was officially off the market. And while the proposal didn't go according to plan, maybe that's what made it special. The couple kept things intimate afterward, with an engagement celebration more low-key than their September wedding later that year. When they exchanged vows in Venice in 2014, it was a private moment shared with loved ones, far from the cameras and chaos. But now, all these years later, the world is once again buzzing. What could have gone so wrong in a seemingly ideal marriage? Well, George had his film commitments and activism, and Amal had her high-stakes international legal work. The two often found themselves separated by nearly 4,000 miles, one in London, the other on Broadway in New York City. And for a while, they tried to stay connected. But how? The efforts they put in.
George Clooney married Amal Alamuddin this year. Amal is a human rights lawyer who worked on the Enron case, was an advisor to Kofi Annan regarding Syria, and was selected for a 3-person UN commission investigating rules of war violations in the Gaza Strip. So tonight, her husband is getting a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Their connection came down to something surprisingly relatable. FaceTime. George once said their secret was simple. They just tried not to go too long without seeing each other, even if it was virtual. They prioritized time together, even if that meant adjusting their schedules or hopping on video calls from opposite time zones. And it wasn't just about staying in touch, it was about building something real. They created a home away from the noise of Hollywood, a private space where their family could grow outside of the spotlight. But where exactly is this home? Not in Beverly Hills or the heart of London, but in a serene 18th-century castle tucked away on a sprawling 425-acre wine estate in Provence, France. This estate, called Domaine La Canadelle, is their sanctuary. Picture this: a peaceful home with a massive vineyard, an olive grove, a lake, a tennis court, and gardens that stretch as far as the eye can see. There is even a pool and room for their twins, Ella and Alexander, to run, explore, and just be kids, free from the noise and constant intrusion of city life and paparazzi. But the story doesn't stop at owning a dream property. This estate came with a price tag of $8.3 million. And for George and Amal, it was never just about the beauty of the place. It was about what it symbolized. It became a private refuge and a protection zone. Because for George and Amal, privacy wasn't just a preference, it was a necessity. Both of them operated in high-risk arenas. Amal dealt with international human rights cases that often involved dangerous regimes and political unrest. George took on documentaries and projects that touched on war zones and government corruption. They knew the real risks that come with their work, and they had zero intention of letting their children become targets because of it. George spoke out publicly about this many times. He made it clear he did not want pictures of his kids out there. It wasn't because he was being difficult, but because they had seen what happened when privacy was taken for granted. During the pandemic, they went even further to protect their family. When it was revealed that Alexander had asthma, they isolated completely, staying home to protect his health. George even made career sacrifices, shifting away from directing, because directing meant longer time away, and that was not something he was willing to risk anymore. They were both parents trying to raise their children with some sense of normalcy, in a world that constantly tried to invade it. Their shared values, commitment to each other, and mutual respect for privacy shaped a marriage that was both rare and deeply intentional. But as perfect as it all sounds, there was a moment recently that shook the foundation. Out of nowhere, news started to spread. Something was off in the Clooney household, and the spark came from an unexpected place: an inappropriate revelation. During an interview, George made a comment, one that changed everything. He casually revealed that Prince Harry had opened up to him in private, sharing his frustrations with royal life and his desire to escape the pressures of the crown. But that confession wasn't George's to share. And Amal didn't take it lightly. Because in her world, confidentiality is sacred, and she was blindsided. To hear her husband publicly reveal details of a private conversation, especially one involving someone as globally watched as Prince Harry, was not just a misstep. It was a serious breach of trust. This wasn't just about Harry. For Amal, it felt personal. If George was willing to disclose that kind of sensitive information, what might come next? How would that reflect on their own efforts to protect their children's privacy? Amal, who had fought so hard to keep Ella and Alexander out of the spotlight, now had to face a disturbing question. Had the man she trusted to guard their family's privacy just compromised someone else's? George's comment may have been well-meaning, but the consequences were anything but small. Reports suggest that Amal confronted him directly and clearly. She allegedly gave him an ultimatum: establish firm boundaries with the media, or risk damaging not just their marriage, but the very principles they built it on. In the days that followed, they took a step back from everything, including the events, the interviews, and the public eye, and gave themselves time to think. They had always lived in the spotlight, but this situation was different. It revealed something they had perhaps overlooked: the tightrope walk between being public figures and preserving a private life. For George and Amal, it became clear that maintaining their relationship required more than love. It required constant recalibration. And while things may have appeared calm from the outside, inside their home, real change was happening. Conversations turned into late-night reflections, and reflections turned into action. They made an effort to re-establish communication and return to the core values that had brought them together in the first place. But that does not mean everything was suddenly perfect. Because then came the decision that surprised everyone. Amal chose to walk away, and it left George reeling. What had gone so wrong between the golden couple of Hollywood? The truth is, it wasn't just about one mistake or one interview. It was everything that came after. George, feeling the weight of losing her, started making bold, emotional efforts to win her back. But beneath his affection and anxiety, something deeper was unraveling. His own fear of aging, of drifting apart, of not being enough for the brilliant, driven woman he married. After nearly 10 years of marriage and a recent relocation to the peaceful countryside of Provence, France, George had hoped for a fresh chapter. But ironically, the opposite happened. With packed schedules and growing emotional distance, their life began to feel more like coexisting than truly connecting. George, now 63, couldn't ignore what he had managed to shrug off in earlier years. The age gap between him and Amal, now 46, suddenly felt heavier. Not because of anything she did, but because of what he feared. He watched her remain radiant, confident, and unstoppable, while he struggled with insecurities that chipped away at his once unshakable confidence. Who would have thought that the same man once voted the most attractive in Hollywood would be hiding behind feelings of inadequacy? Still, George wasn't giving up. Determined to hold on to the love they had built, he turned into a full-time romantic. From candlelit lunches and evening strolls through the vineyards to surprise breakfasts and heartfelt notes, he did everything he could. Every gesture was part of his mission to make Amal feel cherished. But could all that effort undo the emotional distance that had grown over time? Amal's life continued to move forward with purpose. Her legal work was as demanding as ever, and her presence on the world stage hadn't dimmed for a second. She kept going, whether George was there or not. And that, more than anything, might have been what scared him most. But as of now, he's still not giving up. If it means reshaping his life and putting her needs above his career or comfort, George is ready. The question now is whether Amal is willing to meet him halfway. Because love alone isn't always enough. It's the effort, the patience, and the willingness to grow that determine what survives. And for now, the Clooneys are still writing that story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.